Welcome to God's Open. I'm your host, Christopher Fisher, and today we have on the program Warren McLovin. I think this is like an advertisement for McDonald's.
Yeah.
He's loving it.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm demonetized.
So I'm always demonetized. That's the thing. So today we're having a party, and it's a book release party, and I mirrored my camera right so that we could take a look at this beautiful book. And I finally got my copy. I proofed it, and it looks pretty good. Ready to go. Did you get a chance to thumb through a little bit?
I opened the PDF.
Oh, you opened the PDF.
I opened the PDF.
That counts. As
I saw you had these really tiny little words at the bottom of each page, and I was like, it's one of those kind of books. So I just closed it down real quick.
Footnotes like galore. And so here, let me pull up academia.edu real quick. So I did post it on academia.edu, and so that people can find it there. Let's scroll to the bottom and look at these footnotes. Oh man, look at this. Herodotus, you got Ehrman, John Day, Klein, Cicero, all these German names, Aristotle,
Das good.
Angus. Yeah, just a whole lot of footnotes, and so very well sourced. The goal, of course, in this book is to give everyone the evidence so they could see, like the guy that we might be going over today. There's a part where he's reading a historian who makes some very specific claims, but they're just like his general studies being summed up without like supporting evidence. My book's supposed to be the opposite. You should be able to recreate my conclusions from the primary sources, whereas it doesn't even matter if I'm involved or not, right? And so that's the goal. And so I think it's going pretty well. The people who've been reading it have good things to say. By all means, if you buy and read this book, or just read the book, leave a review on Amazon saying what you think. And so if you get it from academia, the page numbers might not line up, because when you upload it to Amazon, they like to flip all the pages on you. And so then all the page numbers are off. And so this is the version that's up on Amazon with the correct page numbers for Amazon, but maybe not for the PDF. But speaking of that, I had to reformat The God is Open, examining the open theism of the biblical authors. And so I had to redo all the page numbers there as well. So if you're going to order that, maybe hold off a couple days on that soft cover before, so that the page numbers could get to the correct page numbers for that. But anyways, very happy day. Celebration. I got some Yingling. That's like an East Coast thing, right?
I'm going to be right back. I think my daughter's calling me. I'll be right back.
Okay. I got Yingling. I think it's East Coast beer. I got some when I was driving through Tennessee or something like that. It's just a light beer. I don't know. I'm not a big light beer drinker, but since I have some, might as well start the party. So today I wanted to highlight in the book the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, Dead Sea Scrolls is an interesting collection of text, of course, found in the Qumran area next to the Dead Sea. So if you know where the Dead Sea is, they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls because they're found right next to the Dead Sea. They're found in these caves, all sorts of scrolls that are preserved. Why are they preserved? Is it just a storage spot? Are they hiding them from the Romans, people who are going to destroy them? Well, we found all sorts of these scrolls, and it's a huge collection of texts from, let's go to, we'll see if the page number is actually correct on this. 151. We'll scroll down. It'll just got to be in the general area. But huge collection of texts, and it's actually very informative for the ideas that were circulating in that time frame. One of the very interesting things about that is there's a lot of fatalistic type of texts that we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which meets up fairly closely with how Josephus describes the scenes in his works. When Joseph talks about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, he does it in Greek terms for his Greek audience, Roman audience, and couches it in terms of fatalism. And so the Essenes were complete fatalists. Everything's by fate. Pharisees had this compatibilistic freedom in which free will and randomness operates, but there is some grounds for predestined events or fated events. Maybe there's multiple paths to get to a certain fated event. It's not the Calvinistic compatibilism that you find today, in which all things are both the result of free will and God's meticulous determinism. It's not that type of Calvinistic fatalism, compatibilism. It's Jewish compatibilism, and there's an entire work on this, entire work on our Jewish idea of compatibilism, and it's cited within here. So in the Josephus section, that's a pretty long section as well. I talk about Josephus's idea of fatalism and fate, and his changing perspective of God as he deals with these Roman and Greek philosophers. And you do see a trajectory within the life of Josephus where he becomes more philosophical the more he's dealing with these pagan philosophers, criticisms of his prior work. And so Dead Sea Scrolls is what we're talking about. Warren McLovin. So the text, the age of these texts vary between 275 BC and 70 AD. And so that's like the physical age of the text. They do some carbon dating to try to figure out when the texts were created, which doesn't mean that that's when it was originally written. Like, for example, the biblical texts were, of course, written before this and then copied onto these texts. And so what we have is a copy of some sort of original, but some of them might be original compositions. But you also kind of know, due to the context of what's in the scrolls, how they talk about God, how they talk about fate, how they talk about the Romans, for example. You're able to kind of piece out where they might fall within that timeline, because 275 BC and 70 AD, that's a huge swath, a huge time frame jump. And so I think I talk about that. I talk about the carbon dating of the various texts in here at some point, and I quote one of the works that just, where did it run off to? Yeah.
How long did it take you to do all of this from start to finish, Chris?
Like 30 years. Well, so throughout college, I read a lot of Platonism. I read a lot of Augustine. I read a lot of some of these early texts that I talk about. And so a lot of this was very much formed in some sort of basic cohesive sense in my honors thesis, which is available on academia.edu. My honors thesis for the University of South Dakota. In the honors program, I wrote The Hellenization of Christianity, which talked about Augustine and Plato, and even open theism. My advisor made me insert open theism as I wanted to just do it on Platonization of Christianity, and then he made me put like a small defense of open theism in it as well. He thought it would read better, but I think that kind of detracts from the academic nature of the work. So really, over a course of 20 to 30 years, putting a lot of this stuff together. Some of the stuff I didn't touch till very recently. And so some of the works that I read within the last year are things like Ben Sira, and going through the Syllabine oracles, the wisdom of Solomon. Incredibly tedious to read. I don't know, some people like that sort of stuff. I don't particularly like doing all that work on things I don't find very interesting. I do like reading things like Homer. That's pretty interesting. I do like reading about the Greek mystery cults and things like that. I'm not a big fan about reading about Platonism, Neoplatonism. You just kind of do it because you have to understand what's going on and the mindset in the ancient world. And so I learned quite a few things. I learned about Tacitus and his method of doing history, in which he just compiles all sorts of various legends, no matter how contradictory, and then he just presents it in one uncohesive mass, and the reader has to kind of dig through and try to, their contradictory statements. It's like, what was in the temple? Was the temple empty? Did the temple have a donkey's head? No, he provides contradictory accounts, just basically legends. And he's not necessarily anti-Jewish, whereas other people are. There was a huge strain of, there's two different strains of pagan philosophers or historians. There are people who hated the Jews, and for example, they talk about how Jews historically don't give directions to foreigners, like the foreign Jews in the city of Rome would be liars. They would give anyone any fortune that they asked for. If they were paid money, they wouldn't give directions to foreigners, only fellow countrymen, these types of things. They hated the Jews. And then there was the ancient historian who saw the Jews as enlightened philosophers. And so it really comes through in their different accounts what there doesn't seem to be like a middle part. Tacitus might be the most middle neutral source that you might find. He doesn't seem to care. But it's not clear that these people have had very much interaction with the Jewish history whatsoever. All sorts of weird legends about the Exodus abound, for example. So a lot of work and a lot of interesting stuff coming out. One of the very interesting things is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they do have an idea, because since they are fatalists, they have an idea of like a metaphysical enlightening. And that at the moment that you're born or before, God gives you a spirit of wickedness or a spirit of goodness, and then your acts follow this spirit. And so that might be early origins of Calvinistic enlightening type metaphysics. You could be found there. They still don't have within the Dead Sea Scrolls a concept of a transcendent God. God still rules from heaven. God still makes decisions. God still watches the world, these types of things. But there is an element of fatalism within that. He's like a super being that kind of controls the destiny of all things, but from a superior place within the universe. So no transcendence there. And so that's one of the things, one of the takeaways from this book is some of the Calvinist concepts are not necessarily Platonistic. Their idea of this spiritual being born good or bad based on what the Calvinists don't really have that idea anyways. They say we're all born bad, not according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of those texts are, you're either imbued with goodness and imbued with evil. Some similarities to the Calvinist idea of the regeneration.
Could you be imbued with swag? Would
Swag.
that be?
I don't know if you can be imbued with swag.
I'm one of the elect that was imbued with swag.
Right, because James White just recently said that you have so much charisma, you could start your own cult
Yeah, that's true.
And be polygamous. Like, that's a huge compliment. You could attract multiple women who don't mind competing with each other for your love and affection and sharing it. That's like the highest. James White gave you like the highest man-to-man compliment. I don't know did he use the word polygamous?
I think he recognized me as a Sigma male. I think that's technically
right.
Yeah.
So did he? Because someone said polygamous, I was like, that's a really good compliment.
Yeah, he said I could start my own cult. He said I'm smarter than Joseph Smith.
Well,
but then he also said I'm a theological buffoon. So somewhere on that scale, I'm like
I think
in
he just doesn't have a high estimation of the general public, and so like a theological buffoon can get a large following, and
apparently of women. That's amazing.
See,
I thought all the ladies that were following me this whole time on Twitter were just Russian bots.
Right.
But maybe that's what James has been seeing, and that's why he's so upset with me. You know, like maybe he thinks I am starting my own all-female cult.
Yeah.
Which as soon as I get my website up online, I'll have a portal so people can go in and send over emails, and we'll get a whole enrollment package so people can like apply to be one of my many brides.
Get some headshots. You could have folders of women.
I'll have folders of women. That's right.
And nobody under the age of like 30 gets that.
Oh man. Oh yeah, Romney with his folders of women.
Yeah, that was just like the media is just trying to grab something to try to torpedo his career, like they did to Howard Dean. Like,
Yeah.
what did Howard Dean ever do to lose his presidential race? He made one like "yeehaw" in the middle of like an impassioned speech.
Yeah.
Media just like laid in it. They didn't really have anything on him. There's both basically like, let's replay this clip and make this guy like a buffoon or something like that.
Try to make him look unhinged.
Yeah, they do that with everything, and so they tried to do that with Romney. And I'm not a Romney fan.
Well, remember when oh my gosh, the Ron Paul revolution happened like in, what was that, 2012? He went to the national convention and they were like, he's like, my foreign policy is the golden rule. I want to do unto others as I want them to do unto me. And he got booed. Like, they're like, no, kill everybody.
Yeah. Well, I remember when he did get applause, though. It was fantastic. He's like, yeah, the government should have drugs legal. It's like, if drugs are legal, I'm not going to be like, oh, I need the government to stop me from doing it. He was like mocking the concept that we don't have the volition to be adults. And then he got a huge applause. And so the media hated him, and they didn't want him to actually get any sort of anywhere in the polls. And so what they would do would be like, oh, first place is, I don't know, McCain or whoever. Second place is so-and-so. Fourth place is, they would skip Ron Paul's ranking where they're talking about how people are being, how many delegates people have. They just like ignored him because that was the biggest threat, because he would completely destroy the deep state.
Yep.
He would dismantle it. And so
we were this close. We were this close, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
We were this close. I gave up on politics after that. I said,
yeah, it's all rigged. And remember the Democrats, like, Hillary beat Obama, but they've used their super delegates to get Obama in. Then Sanders was beating Hillary, and they used their super delegates to get Hillary in. Like, there's no voting. It's not.
It's the illusion.
It's nothing.
For our American politics are like theistic compatibilism. It's the illusion of free will, you know?
Yeah, but Jake writes here, he says, leave the book of wisdom alone. LOL. Well, I think we talked about this maybe last time, where the book of wisdom has wisdom as maybe like a hypostasis of God, like a Platonic embodiment, whereas Ben Sira doesn't quite come to that point. But wisdom's fairly equivalent to God and given God properties within the book of wisdom. So it's interesting. But yeah, so I think it's a really good book. If anyone finds errors, or they think I'm wrong in something I say, or I misunderstand a point, feel free to reach out, and I could change things that are wrong. And so if you think I get wisdom wrong, feel free to comment on that and send me messages. I'm more than happy to be wrong on things like the book of wisdom, which I don't really care about. Like, yeah, so it's not all pro-open theistic stuff. Like, for example, the Dead Sea Scrolls, very fatalistic ideas. You have some Platonism seeping in. I think we talked about last time, we talked about the Syllabine oracles and how that late maybe first century text has some of those ideas. And the book of Maccabees, the third book, is a very late Alexandrian text, which has very early conceptions of God, which shows that it's not like a uniform contamination of the field, that it's happening in these pockets, and there's contentions going on, and it's not all there's a general force, but there are some holdovers. And so I think that's fairly good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, one day reading it. I've got it. I just have to make time.
Well, it is being recorded by an individual that I commissioned to record it. And
I believe I know who that individual is.
Right.
He's got those soothing dulcet tones.
It's a good book to put on if you just like want to like fall. It's not like an exciting book.
I'm just going to jump straight to the wisdom chapter anytime I need to go to sleep. That's what you've basically told us, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, jump to any chapter if you want to fall asleep. I'm not writing exciting books. Let me tell you that. That
It was
probably
the
not
best
the
of
best
times. It was the worst
advertisement
of
for my.
times.
You will not be excited reading this book. I can make that promise.
Do you ever get Frodo to Mount Doom though? That's the question.
Right, that'll be part 2 is Frodo
Oh,
to
okay.
Mount Doom. But okay, so some of my long-term goals in the debate settings is to get people to stop talking about Aristotle. He's a nobody. He's a nothing. Plato's everything in this world. And so they're like, "Oh, what you mean is no one talks about Aristotle. No one cares about Aristotle. He's a minor footnote in second, third century philosophy." To stop getting people to talking about Augustine's Manichaeanism, which, yeah, he was a hearer for some 9 years. It might have influenced him somewhat. But Platonism, when he talks about the Bible, he says, I didn't accept the words of the Bible until I read it in light of Platonism. It was Platonism who gave him his conception of God. And from that conception of God, all else flows from that. And so, yeah, call him a Gnostic, that's fine. He has ideas of Gnostic enlightening in which Christ is the spark. When he talks about Platonism, he says, Platonism could give me absolutely everything, all my philosophy and ideas, but it doesn't give me charity. And what he means by charity is Jesus. Jesus is that divine spark that allows him to transcend through the Platonic ascension to get back towards the one. That's what enables him to move through those levels of reality. And so it's this divine Gnostic enlightening that he's describing. So I do think it is fairly accurate to call him a Gnostic in that sense, because Gnosticism is defined as a secret knowledge or a secret enlightening that gives you some sort of benefit over other humans, which allows you to transcend levels of reality. And so I do think that is accurate. But when people start talking about Manichaeanism, which is a dualistic, physicalistic system, and start talking about Platonism, then I've done good. I've done well.
It wasn't even just the Manichaeans or Neoplatonism, but it was also the Mesalaeans and Enkratites up there in North Africa that also played a role on his influence. So he was just kind of like and even there's a little bit of Stoicism in there. He was just like a weird little mix of that era, and the impact he had on Western Christianity is just profound.
Right. And so Torah writes, is this book going to be on Amazon? It currently is on Amazon. It's live on Amazon. You could get it in Kindle format. You could get it in paperback. You could get it in hard copy. I haven't seen a proof of the hard copies. I don't plan on ordering a proof of the hard copy. So do that at your own risk. It looks good in the previews. And so it doesn't actually, I don't make more money if you get the soft copy or hard copy over the Kindle. And so it's not like you're benefiting me by whichever version you choose or anything like that. And so get what you want to get, and whatever format suits your fancies. But yeah, so a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of references. And so I'll probably have to take a break from this type of work for a little bit and work on some other projects before doing part 2. Part 2, I'm going to have to read through a lot of Clement and a lot of Origen and a lot of Gnostics and a lot of early church fathers. It's gonna be a little painful. Like, I don't enjoy it. And so, do you write books you don't enjoy?
Yeah, that's an interesting decision that you've made there. Dedicate countless hours to stuff that you don't really enjoy.
Well, yeah, it's like, what am I doing with my life? I'm making all the wrong decisions. So if any Calvinist is out there and they want me to move out of this space and you're like a multimillionaire, just offer me millions of dollars and I'll disappear and I'll buy a new car for my kids. They just crash.
You'll help me start my cult.
Yeah, I'll help you start. I can't do that because they're going to be paying me to get out of the limelight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I see how it is.
Yeah,
fair weather friend there.
I am all for starting cults. Like if you're the top of you don't want to be the bottom of these cults. You want to be kind of towards like the top of these pyramids. You want to be the Jim Jones, not the guy that's like handing out the Kool-Aid or something like that.
That's it, man. I want to be first on Haley Bob's comment. I don't want to be the last guy going, are you sure this is a good idea? You know,
he's like, okay, if we all wear the same tennis shoes, like this is the uniform. They really like, I don't know what they were wearing, like Reeboks or something. Like, this is the uniform for the spacecraft that we wear. We wear Adidas track suits and Adidas shoes.
No. I'm a dad in his 40s, right? The official cult attire is going to be like New Balance.
New Balance. Yeah. The big N. You don't, if you're a dad,
yeah,
don't wear New Balance shoes.
New Balance, Costco jeans, Costco polo, right? That's the official uniform for my cult. All right.
You got to like have an America hat on with like an American flag.
That's it.
And one you see a lot is grunt style t-shirts. I do own one grunt style t-shirt.
Grunge style? What's grunge style?
Grunt, like an army grunt with a gun.
Oh, I got you.
They got the little patches and stuff like that. But sounds good. So what else I have for us today is the Calvinist Boo Crew. And so I'm going to have to reshare the screen so that we could get the audio. But so because this is a party, we are going to do a review. And it's a review of what seems to be objectively a nice person. And I've had some interaction with him on the God is Open Facebook page. And he's not violated the rules so bad to warrant a ban. Sometimes he kind of avoids questions, but he seems to be not a bad guy. So it's like, I don't know if he's.
I think I was the first guest they had on their program a couple years ago.
I think,
and I went on there, and if I remember correctly, I talked about dynamic omniscience, and they were very civil and very cordial. And he tried to really. Whoa! Did I just take over the program, ladies and gentlemen? We've taken over. Anyway. What just happened?
I just had to switch to my earphones because I don't want feedback from any sound. So
okay, I got you.
Continue talking. Let's pretend nothing happened.
Yeah,
there's no screen switch.
There was no screen switch. No. So I went on there. They were very civil. He'd really tried to understand dynamic omniscience. He wasn't, I don't think, intentionally trying to straw man or anything like that. Very, very cordial. And I had a good experience visiting with him. I don't have anything negative to say at all. I mean, I enjoyed my time there. So if there's anything negative coming to them, it's going to be from Chris tonight. I'm Mr. Nice Guy.
I'm a very negative guy. Well, you
got your negative headphones on, so that's.
So I did get to travel to Alaska for work-related concerns, and someone met me from Facebook, and then she was telling other people, in real life, he's actually a pretty decent guy. And I'm like, that's pretty hyper. Oh, this other girl I was talking to, I was sitting talking to her, and she's like, wow, you got a good voice for like podcasting. I said, oh yeah, I'll probably have to look into that. So I felt
interesting. It's interesting. I'm called the cult leader, but you're the one talking to all the ladies. You know, like I don't know, man. I think we may need to redirect that.
That's what I'm saying. If you're the cult leader, you get the highest access to all the women in the world. Not in the world, like the low IQ ones who sometimes I was watching on HBO Max or something. There's this mini series about the Nexium cult. These people are like high IQ, and they fell for the most obvious scam artist in the world. And he's just sitting there talking like esoteric.
That's the dude that was like branding women and stuff.
Yeah.
In like the celebrity world.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they're all falling for it. And they seem like smart, rich people, and they're just funneling their money to an obvious scam. I think there's something deep within people that's like a religion-sized hole. And so when you're this weird left there, they all hate Trump. When you're a weird leftist atheist, you gravitate towards these crazy cults that just suck your time and money and suck your soul. Something like that. It feels like that. But we could get to our friend over here. I gotta pull this off and then reshare it. But yeah, that's interesting. The whole Nexium documentary, the people who made it, they're trying to project themselves as like innocent and taken aback. And the commenters down below, or whoever comments on these shows, are like, yeah, I mean, these guys knew what they're doing. They're not so innocent.
Yeah.
But all right, let's see if we got some sound.
So
here.
I like that little slide there. He's got his ex-Calvinist and anti-Calvinist perspectives, his non-Calvinist external criticism, Calvinist, hyper-Calvinist, but he considers Calvinist as an internal critique. I'm wondering where that's going to come into play. That's interesting.
So Jake says, do we have an IQ to attractiveness graph? Okay, so there's an interesting book by Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, and his book's about education. And he talks about these stereotypes of like athlete versus nerd are incorrect. It tends to be like the really athletic people who are also like the intelligent people. And that seems to play out in my high school, where like my calculus class was filled with football players, like my AP calculus class. And so a lot, that's a very eye-opening book. You should read through it, and then you could understand the state of American education and the lack of reading ability of a lot of our students. There's like samples of an average public schooler wouldn't be able to parse this sentence or whatnot. And so it is an interesting book. I don't got the title offhand, but it is by Charles Murray, author of The Bell Curve. And so IQ seems to correlate positively to attractiveness. So,
but let me start down there.
And here's our Calvinist Boo Crew, our friend here. And he calls us our friends. That's a nice thing. On my last podcast, I called the Calvinist guy friend like 15 times, and he comes on. He's like, "You're slandering me." It's like, I'm calling you friend. I'm trying to be friendly. I made no looks jokes or anything like that. I refrained from I was being nice. Oh,
that by just highlighting one particular criticism. Now, this is one of the sharpest criticisms of Calvinism that we're going to talk about today. And I hope to do it justice in a winsome way. We're not here to just take pot shots at each other. But I think.
So Roddy says, it's not true. Oh, where did it run off to? He says, it's not true. If attractiveness to intelligence were inversely proportional, I'd be a genius. So one data point doesn't really affect an average when you're talking about 300 million people in the U.S. or something like that. So just look at the denominator and see, look how big your sample size is. And so there's probably big enough population sample size, positive correlation.
I think we Calvinists have to be aware. This is what our critics are sometimes saying about us. So this is from the book Understanding Calvinism by the God is Open crowd. This is a group of open theists. And in the book Understanding Calvinism, the accusation comes forward. It says this: the Society of Calvinists dramatically differs from mainstream Protestant Christianity in the emphasis it puts on adherence to doctrine.
So in my experience, this is very true. And so here's my background. I'm an open theist. I've always been an open theist, and I've grown up in Calvinist churches. I've been surrounded by Calvinists my entire life. I have 4 decades of interacting with these guys and countless hours of internet interaction with these people. There's a huge emphasis on doctrine. And so they need a systematic theology, and they need this systematic theology to work in very specific ways. And so if you throw a little wrench in that system, a lot of times their complaint is not that your evidence is wrong or what you're saying is wrong, but that's going to mess with other aspects of their system. This is an intense focus on the system that they've already set up in their mind. And so they have to reject evidence based on the threats to that system. So
that's very dialed in, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and if you differ from one of these doctrines even slightly, you're outsider. So if you go read DeWesel's book He criticizes Bruce Ware and basically calls him an open theist for believing that God has emotions, because in classical theism and Calvinism, God is simple. God is pure act. God can't be acted on. He can't have potential. And so he can't have emotions, because emotions mean all these things. So Doezel makes Ware an outsider. He calls him a theistic mutualist.
Mutabalist.
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 And so that is funny. So it's like one little thing and then you're out. So it's this very, very strict allegiance to the system. I don't think.
One thing too I want to point out here real quickly. Over on the shorts, they have a Key and Peele skit that is absolutely hilarious. So at some point when we're done with this, we may want to watch that Key and Peele skit. I'm just saying.
I gotta get like my suggestions out of here. People are gonna be like, "What the heck?" I'm in.
We're all judging you right now. We're like, "Oh, he's a Key and Peele."
I'm learning about Sola. Yeah,
how to upset a. I'm not going to repeat that, but yeah, there's some interesting stuff there on the side.
Let's get that out of there. Okay, so I gotta okay, go theater mode. Get that out of there.
There you go.
I don't need these weird suggestions.
But that is an awesome Key and Peele skit. I love it. Have you seen it?
I've watched a lot of their stuff, probably a majority of their skits, and so I do love a lot of things they did. I don't know if I've watched that one specifically.
They're basically like Power Rangers, and each one of them is like in a different Falcon.
Yep, I've seen that.
Green Falcon, Red Falcon, Blue Falcon. But I don't know if it was Key or Peele, but he's the Black Falcon, but he's in the Green Falcon.
Right.
So they just keep calling him Black Falcon. He's like, "Hey, hold up, I'm in a Green Falcon."
Yes, I have seen that skit, and it is pretty funny.
They're hilarious, man. I love those guys on Chappelle. All right, enough sidetrack. Let's get back to the Boo Crew. Sorry.
Sounds good.
You distracted me.
Right. Okay, so I'm gonna I kind of watched this a little bit. I fell asleep to this, so maybe like I put it on and then I listened about like 20 minutes before I drifted off, and so I do have some premonition of what's going to happen. And a guy's going to call up and say, "Yeah, we do have a serious doctrine, and doctrine's very important to us." It's like, okay, that's well, I think you might be proving the point.
This doctrine becomes a cherished identity marker and a trophy, which separates the Calvinist from all other Christian groups. This doctrine sets them apart as superior and is sacred.
Yeah, and our Calvinist Boo Crew friend here, I don't know his name offhand. I don't know. Do you?
I think it says J.C. Bear, I think is what I'm reading on the screen.
Well, yeah, but does he go by? Is that like his actual name?
Oh, I don't recall. We were interviewed. We went through that interview, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't recall.
So he's partially blind, right?
I don't know if he is.
No,
I know one of the other gentlemen on there was.
Okay, for that gentleman, if you're watching this, I'm the most stunning Norwegian man you've ever seen. Like 6'5" and like super built.
And in this particular episode, our God is Open, friends. This episode is called "The Cult of Calvinism." So that's pretty intense. They're assigning motives there, and I think that's a criticism we have to pay attention to, but also point out that it is what it is. Benjamin, go ahead, brother.
This is one of those things that I often come to the defense of my Calvinist brothers in the forums on, is that I think what's really being said here, one is that doctrine is so important to the salvation. I mean, it's like, I think that's one of the strong points of Calvinism.
So I had this I was in this Calvinist Bible study, like while my kids were at Awanas at a Calvinist church. I would go to the Calvinist Bible study, and then he's talking about how Catholics think that not even Catholics. There are some Christians out there who deny the virgin birth, and he's like, "Oh, that's heretical. It's gonna set you apart." So like after class, I didn't challenge. I don't like to be like super controversial and disrupt stuff. So after class, I go up to him. I say, "So let's say that we take you and we clone you, and he holds every single belief that you currently hold, except for the virgin birth. then is that person going to hell? And he like stopped and he thought about it. He's like, probably not. But just shows like like so guys like this are like, doctrine is very important. These things are going to like get you kicked out of the kingdom for these small deviations. I don't think so. I don't think that Calvinist,
No,
yeah, if he
it's
goes
not the
to
way
heaven
salvation works. It's not the way salvation works.
and he's missing that one thing, like virgin birth, like what? Like a little tiny clips of a couple gospels, then he's going to hell for eternity or gonna burn forever. I don't think so.
Is that the Calvinist usually puts a high emphasis on doctrine, and I think that's actually a weak point of a lot of the rest of Christianity. Like Catholicism is more just in practice, go to the church, hear the pastor say do better, and then go home. A lot of mainstream Protestant Christianity is just in worship. That's one of my favorite things about the Calvinist theology is the emphasis on doctrine. But I think that what's really going on here in this is that where he says is a cherished identity marker is, I could be wrong, but this is the thing that I usually come to the defense of the Calvinist brothers in, is there's this conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory. And I, even as a, kind of a semi-outsider to the Calvinist camp, recognize this as such, that Augustine was a Gnostic. There's this thing, I mean, you see it all the time that they.
And so his criticism here is that we call Augustine a Gnostic, which, well, what is a Gnostic? I guess it would be the first question. And then does he meet that definition? And so if Gnosticism is purely defined as having a secret enlightening knowledge, which makes you part of the elect to understand things in some special esoteric way that gives you special knowledge. Like every debate I have with Calvinists devolves into that.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just not elect, and so you can't read these texts. You don't know what these texts means because you don't have this spiritual enlightening that allows you to. It's like that's Gnosticism. It's this spiritual enlightening that gives you access to these secretive truths. And I don't think within my new book, there's a section on the New Testament, and I go through all of Romans, talking about Paul and his ideas as a sample of where the biblical authors were at, because Paul might be the most, I'd say, philosophical of all the biblical authors. Maybe the author of Hebrews is on par, but Paul might be, if Paul doesn't teach it, if Paul would be the outlier. And so if you're looking for those extreme doctrines on election or regeneration or spiritual enlightening, you're not going to find them in anyone except Paul, if even. And so I thought he'd be a good one to go through as an example.
You say Augustine was a Gnostic, and the Calvinist is just wants to have elite knowledge and be superior, and they're a Gnostic cult and all this stuff. And I think that's probably, I don't know, I just sniff a little of that odor from that there. That's just, I think that personally is kind of a heretical insinuation to say that the Calvinist is a Gnostic. I think that's something that I think is like borderline heresy to say
To
that.
offer a criticism is heresy? To offer a criticism and say, hey, you're appealing to secret divine gnosis. That's what the Gnostics had in common, and he's saying to make that connection is heretical.
Right. So I think the more interesting question is, historically, was Augustine a Gnostic? And we need to take our emotions. I'm not like a super emotional guy. One of the guys here is a super emotional guy who says, "Oh, I'd be scared to death if open theism was true." Like I'm just not that guy. Historically, was Augustine a Gnostic? What's the definition of Gnostic? Does he meet that definition? That doesn't mean Gnosticism's false. Gnosticism could be true. There's a possibility it could be that the biblical authors were Gnostics. We can't rule that out. You'd have to make an evidence case for or against it. But I do think he meets the technical definition. And so historically speaking, without our emotions, I think the label's accurate.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I think it's I think we have to. I think the God is open crowd have to be really careful with their statements here, and I don't mean that in a challenging sense, in a fisticuffs sense. I mean that in, you know, it can turn their criticism. It can turn people off to their criticism. Another thing that is in that book, Bradstreet, I'll get to you in just a second here, brother.
Yeah, so it's how often are you talking to the Calvinists, and they quote the Corinthians, the natural man cannot understand the things of God.
Yep.
And guess what? You're the natural man, and this is the point in the debate where they've given up debate, and it's just like, we're just gonna say you just don't have the mental capacity. It's like saying your opponent's mentally handicapped. Like literally that's what they're saying. You're mentally handicapped. You don't have the intellectual capacity to understand the truth of this. And so, my experience, it always devolves into that. And I got,
in my debate with Matt Slick, that's where he kept going. Was I'll try and explain it to you later. I'll try and teach it to you later. You know, but 1 Corinthians 2:14, the natural man, blah 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 blah. And you know, every debate I have on total depravity, it seems like comes back to 1 Corinthians 2:14.
I think
they don't really even want to pay attention to what, like, the animalish nature, the soulish man. They don't want to consider 1 Corinthians 3. Like, it's that one little verse, because that defends their idea of their Gnostic divine enlightenment, their superior understanding. And it's like, okay, God does give natural revelation. He gives us scriptural insight. He gives us our faculties where we can interact with, consider, and process true things. But you're appealing to some sort of ontological change by way of some supernatural divine enlightenment. Buddy, that's Gnosticism. Like, let's just own what that is, you know?
It looks like he has a screenshot from God is Open. He crosses out the name, which is nice to do when you're sharing from groups. But it's some post about Calvinism is known for preaching a bloodless grace alone salvation, which is interesting. So that's a whole can of worms, but that's not necessarily an indicative claim of open theists in general.
No. And that's one of the things too, like, you got to be careful. Like, when I criticize a Calvinist for holding, like, infant damnation, for example, I'm criticizing the Calvinist that holds that view. I'm not saying every Calvinist holds it. Now, I could say I think every Calvinist should if they're consistent, but then I'm making another argument, you know? And I'll have Calvinists come back and they're like, we don't all believe that. And I go, good, help me point out those guys that do and tell them they're wrong. You know, like,
oh, they'll never call out their own side is the thing. And so this is one of the indications of why Calvinism is a cult that I've experienced. Is you could say the exact same thing as a Calvinist, and the Calvinist will attack you, but not the other person who said the exact same thing who is a Calvinist.
Dude, are you referring to my video today?
Well, okay. I wasn't. I was referring to the common meme about God making all sin, predestining all sin. But your video is an excellent example of double standards based on insider outsider. The example I was pointing to was they just don't like people that they don't like saying the things that they believe, but the people that they do like saying the things. Okay, so for example, the media will say they'll brag about the Jews controlling the world. They'll say, oh, the Jews control so much amount of the media, so much amount of politics. They'll brag about it. But when, like, a white guy will say it, they'll say that guy's an anti-Semite. Down with him, destroy him. So it's a double standard. They're both saying the same thing. One person will say there's national replacement. They're trying to bring in all these immigrants to replace us. They'll try to destroy that guy, but then brag about it over here. The people who love immigration, they'll say it, and nothing will happen. It's a double standard. The two people are saying the exact same thing, but based on where they fall and if they're criticizing it or praising it, that's what determines whether or not there's pushback and their lives are going to get destroyed. And so that's the more of the phenomenon I'm talking about. But you are pointing to a different phenomenon where they have insider, outsider, intellectual standards, and immoral standards. And if you want to give the audience a little brief about that.
If they didn't catch it. So basically, I was reached out to by a Reformed church in Colorado, and they wanted me to debate James White on open theism or dynamic omniscience. And then their church elders went to my channel, and they just did a cursory inspection of my videos, and they saw James White with the title Theological Buffoon. Of course, I'm responding to him calling me that. And they saw like James White, perfect example of a cult leader. And again, I'm responding to James White saying I'm like smarter than Joseph Smith and that I'm going to start my own cult. But the Calvinists didn't even watch the videos. The elders of that church just thought, oh, well, Warren's attacking James. He's calling him a cult leader and a theological buffoon and saying he's not saved. So they call me back the next day and they go, well, listen, we're not gonna platform you because we think your behavior online is inappropriate. You should not call another Christian a theological buffoon or a cult leader or challenge their faith, even if you disagree on these doctrines, Warren. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't do that. That was James. I was responding to him. And they're like, oh, well, we'll find him another debate opponent then. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're platforming him? You just told me you couldn't platform me for those things that he did, and you're platforming him while deplatforming me. And the name of that church is, I think, Breathe Reformation out of Colorado Springs. So tell them Warren said hi.
Right. So that's an example of cult mentality. We got a double set of standards for one for your friends, one for your enemies. And a lot of these things are just pretenses.
Yep.
James White just doesn't want to debate you. They're looking for excuses. They don't care if their excuses are true. Their excuses have some sort of semblance of truth, but they're not going to hold those standards to their own side.
That's it. It's just hypocrisy.
Right.
And that's a good sign. That's a good sign of being ideologically possessed and not caring about the truth. And Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And Christians should be more committed to truth than their own little paradigms of, you're with me or you're not with me. Like I can agree with somebody that I disagree with on 98% of everything else if he's telling truth about those 2%. But this cult-like mentality, they really struggle to do that.
And so we don't say this to be whiny, like, oh, they're not treating us with the look. What if the shoe is on the other foot? We're saying when you're dealing with these people, no, you're not dealing with honest people that are looking for. I'm not saying JC Bear is.
No. Neither one of us are talking about JC. We're talking in general.
Yeah, in general, these This is why I call Calvinism a cult, because in my general experience, it's this is what you're dealing with. These are the people you're dealing with. You gotta understand they're not thinking like you're thinking. You want evidence, facts, reason. Let's come to the truth. Let's determine from let's get together and figure these things out. They're not coming at that angle. It's inside or outside. You're a target. You represent an existential threat to their worldview. They got to save the doctrine. And so whatever they do to you, no matter how horrific, no matter what names they call, it's all justified to save that doctrine.
If they will jettison context and intent of Scripture knowingly to preserve their ideological paradigm, we don't stand a chance. That's just the sad reality of it.
And so what is interesting is the Calvinists are not calling out each other for these breaches of intellectual integrity either. And so they will always defend their own no matter what. So I was in a debate with a Calvinist online in which I said, yeah, the Bible doesn't teach this pure transcendent God outside space and time. And they had a more warrior God outlook. And there's a Calvinist that actually agreed with me, but he was still attacking me, saying, oh, I got my conception of God wrong. He believed in progressive revelation of the Bible, that the Bible was written like I was describing, but I was just wrong in my conception of God. And I'm trying to point this out to him. I said, why aren't you out here defending me to this Calvinist I'm debating with? You believe the things that I believe about what the Bible teaches, and you're attacking me rather than him. Insider, outsider.
That's it.
Is what's going on.
They say this: the Calvinist authority structure seeks to exert a much higher degree of control over information. Thus, Calvinism, sociologically, has for many years been a closed system with its own unique values and its own unique language. Now, this is putting Calvinists in an outside of the camp type position. Bradster, go ahead, my brother.
Yeah, this is the magical Gnostic wand.
So yeah, if you look through my program, I don't say very much things about like Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses and like I disagree with these people, but it's like there's something about Calvinism in which they become militaristic and cultish. Maybe Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses are like that. It's not in my experience. So to the extent that's inside or outside or with Calvinism, it feels like it's Calvinism is in their own bubble and they're against the world.
So what they've done is they've said we're the not Brad and JC and these guys. I'm talking about Calvinism in general. I don't want to make that equivocation anymore tonight. So if anybody's watching, just know that that's going to stand for the entirety of the show. but Calvinists in general have said that they're among the elect. They possess the secrets of, the divine revelation. Like they've got this, that they have a higher view of God. They have a higher understanding of Scripture, a higher view of sovereignty. And so they're the ones that have isolated themselves from Christendom and marked themselves as superior. And then when the rest of us come along and go, look, they're schismatic and they're separating themselves and they're getting into inside versus outside, they go, why are you doing that to us? And it's like, well, one, we're not doing it. You did it to yourself. And two, according to your own theology, God did it. So like in both cases, we didn't do this. What are you talking about? Either you did or God did. But I don't think that's very fair for them to say that you and this book or Christians in general are the ones trying to make them schismatic. I mean, they're schismatic by their very nature. I mean, you look at the Reformation and the history that Calvinism came out of, it's a schismatic group. Originally they were like, we're going to restore Rome. And then they're like, nah, let's just start over. It's schismatic. Just own it, just own it. And, but I don't see what all the fuss is. Just go, yeah, we have the superior view. That's it. We are schismatic because we believe God has enlightened us and given us, the keys to this divine understanding by way of our regeneration. And maybe one day, we don't know, Warren, we don't know you, Chris. Maybe one day God will regenerate you to our level. Maybe God will enlighten you to our level. We don't know. We don't know the divine will and the mystery and the plans, but we just know where we are now. And right now you're over there and we're over here, just own it, guys. Like, it's not a big deal. We don't, this is the paradigm y'all created. So just own it. It's not, we're not trying to be mean about it.
That everybody likes to talk about. If I had a nickel for every time I was called a Gnostic online, man, I'd be rich. A lot of times, whenever I hear people talking about Calvinism and how horrible it is, it's usually by us extending a hand of invitation. Oh, come on over. And we try to unite as to where we can and put aside our disagreements where we can. And then we're told, you guys are a bunch of Gnostics, you're Platonic, you're Aristotelian, and it turns into something like that really quick.
Yeah, cut it with the Aristotelian guys. Let's kill that practice.
And that's okay, but I always throw this back, and I'll close with this. What ends up happening is I throw this back at them. I'll say, okay, so how many Arminianism pages do you see Brad Pack going on and saying, guess what? Calvinism it's time to take over. It's time to rule the world. We have the one ring that rules them all.
And so Brad Pack is his own name. And so he's probably not a typical sample of your random internet Calvinist.
Mm-mm.
Whenever I see hostile, bombastic, completely incoherent memes that are highly ideologically dependent on assuming all the priors of the cult, Those are coming from Calvinists. I'll have to pull up some examples.
Yeah,
Like-
you've got Brad Pack, right? Brad he's a very reasonable guy. For a while, he was questioning Calvinism. I think he had even rejected it for a while, came back to it. Like he will try to see things from a different perspective. Like I think he's got good intentions, and I think he's a generally like decent guy. But then you've got different people like that. Like you've got like Tyler Vela before he apostatized, and you've got Derek Morrell. Like, we're not saying Brad is in that same group, but we're saying those are groups within larger Calvinism, And so like sometimes our criticism will be of like the Morrell or the Vela types, and we're not necessarily going after Brad.
Right. And so like it's the general debate pages, all the bombastic memes appear to primarily originate from Calvinists, and the other Calvinists, they don't step in and say, hey, get out of here. We don't want you representing Calvinism because you're being bombastic.
Yeah.
You don't see that internal checking.
Great point, brother. Great point. Now, Benjamin, I want to check in with you here. I want to read one more quote from the God is Open work here, this Understanding Calvinism work. It says this: the control processes at work within the Calvinist.
And now he's displaying my, there's no morality in a deterministic world. My quote about that, in which I say there's no morality in a deterministic world because there are no moral actors. Everything is meaningless, a meaningless script, like a computer simulation being ran in a dark warehouse corner. There is no morality in a simulation. If there's no moral actors, there's no morality. You could call it morality, but that's not what people conceptualize as morality. There has to be moral choices rather than like an eternal fate machine just running its course. And
Amen.
so Warren,
Yeah.
I've been editing a book that you'd be very interested in.
Okay.
And
Does it have pictures?
I could add pictures.
Okay.
I could add pictures.
Can I color in this book?
Yeah,
Chris?
you can. Any of my books online, you can color it.
Okay, so
You
I'm
are
getting more
allowed-
interested. I'm getting more because
Okay.
it's not as long as it's not about the Book of Wisdom and I can color.
Right. So it's McCabe's classic books on open theism. He's very philosophically based, and he puts out like a massive tome. Like my original book was, I don't know, like a 15, like 150,000 words or something like that. Both of his books combined are about that size, and the whole work is intellectually based arguments for dynamic omniscience. And this is in the late 1800s. And so
Ooh.
I'm going to be putting out a combined version of his two books in paperback, hard book, and digital
Can you get
edition.
that to me? Can you get that to me this evening so I can have time to study it before my debate with Francis Turton on Dio?
Yeah, it actually has so many fantastic points. He lays out all the arguments in excruciating detail. So like these people who are writing back in these days, they will go on for pages and pages on the same subject. It's like, I don't think modern populations, that we have too much ADHD to like sit there and read like 20 pages of the same argument about the same thing. I'll be like, well, of course you don't have free will if your decisions exist externally to you because you didn't make those decisions. Like there's no point in which you're the volitional reason for those. Yeah, everything's based on antecedents. You have no part in these decisions. If everything's based on antecedents, there's no free will there. It's like, that's just like common sense to me. This guy will go on for like chapters. It's like, oh, okay, but that's not. I'm terrible at selling books and hyping up books. I'm
You're
just
like,
the
this
worst.
guy just drools on and on and on.
But you'll love it.
It's so monotonous and excruciating, the detail this guy goes. And you can get it now for $19.99.
Yeah, it's like you'll love this. Yeah, you'll be bathing in this. I don't know. But fantastic. And I could send you some digital copies right away, but I am formatting it to put both his books into one text and then put it online in the God is Open collection. It is a good edition. It's a very early example of dynamic omniscience, a very robust case, and it's a very, very early example of perfect being theology as it relates to open theism. And so it's philosophically orientated.
Well, I'm not all philosophy over here, Chris. I'm the biblical guy, but I have Bible in this hand. I'm right-handed, so I always start with my right hand.
Yeah.
And then I defend that with my left hand, which I have philosophy in. I'm not
And this will
or.
appeal to your philosophy side.
Okay.
The left brain portion. I don't know if it's a left brain or right. Really, your left brain portion of whatever. I don't know.
This authoritarian social structure controls feedback from group members and refuses to be modified. It is consistently observed that Calvinists manifest a pronounced degree of partisanship and almost obsessive allegiance to the doctrine and to idolized persons.
Yeah. Everyone's defending Matt Slick. Like this guy, like this scum of the earth, he will just lie and say literally anything to try to win a debate. In the Will Duffy debate, he's going over Jeremiah 18 the week before, and then during the Duffy debate, he says, "Oh, I don't know that passage. I haven't studied it. I don't know the context." Like literally the most famous passage within the Bible, maybe one of the most famous passages within the Bible. He's saying, "Oh, I don't know the context to that. I can't answer your questions about that." Just the lies. And these people defend him. Just the absolute trash human beings.
You're talking about allegiance to an idolized person. You've got the church going, we don't platform people who call others theological buffoons, cult leaders, and challenge their faith. Like, you're full of hate, and we're not going to platform you. And they go, oh, our bad. That was James White. Well, we're not going to platform you, but we'll find him another opponent now. It's like, that's what we're talking about here. This partisanship and an obsessive allegiance to this idolized person. He's on their team. So it doesn't matter what he does that's inappropriate. It's only inappropriate if people on the outside do it.
The thing is, I think James White is like a terrible human being in person too. Like the people who you bring him to their churches to debate, and if there's like adversarial, like he's just a miserable guy in real life. He just walks around being miserable. And so between him and Matt Slick, I'm always wavering of which one is like the worst, the most awful of the two. And I think I'm settling maybe more and more on James White. I'll have to go back and listen to all my James White stuff. Like he's just terrible. Like his debate with John Sanders, I was talking about the other day. John Sanders comes in there thinking he's going to have an intellectual conversation that's scholastic. And
Sanders came in like a scholar and a professor and was trying to be cordial, and White just like a rabid dog.
Yeah, like what are you doing, White? You're just the scum of the earth. And so White is not a good, as you are learning. I suggested the alternate title of your latest video was Warren McGrew is a slow learner.
Here's the thing. I've known James now back and forth online for a couple years, and I know that he hasn't engaged me honestly or fairly, nor has he defended his own positions with the same spirit. I understand that, but I was maintaining hope of getting through to him, and I was thinking maybe his heart was not so hard-hearted. Now I'm genuinely concerned for his soul. That's where I'm at now.
I don't have any concern for his soul, so you're nicer than me.
Yeah. Well, everybody knows that, Chris.
How often have you heard, you guys just worship John Calvin? Benjamin, go ahead, brother.
I don't think I've ever told a Calvinist that they worship John Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
I'll point out like quotes of John Calvin and to just show them how they disagree with Calvin, and they'll get real mad and they'll be like, Calvin doesn't represent Calvinism. I'm like, okay, but might he be a good data point for some sort of point that I'm trying to make that you should possibly, I don't know, consider?
Go into Geneva during Calvin's reign and say, I'm a Calvinist and I disagree with institutes of the Christian religion. That is an offense punishable by death. Okay. Like
at minimum, like whipping. And so like he'd have his opponents like flogged and physical torture. So it's not always death. I think he had just a personal hatred of Servetus and the city later went in and enacted and said to no, that's before that time they enacted it. To get him back to Geneva, they like it said that his his institutes was God breathed, and he reformed all
on
the
the same
laws.
par as Scripture. Mhm.
And so, John Calvin, of course, is a terrible, terrible human being. He's not a terrible scholar, and so he makes good theological points and observations about the Hebrew and Greek texts. Augustine was not a Greek scholar, and so I think our friend here is going to point that out here pretty quickly. Augustine's not like a Greek scholar. John Calvin is a Greek scholar and a Hebrew scholar. And so he's worth consideration. He's a bad human being, though. And so when Calvinists defend John Calvin, the man, as justly executing his ideological opponents, that to me represents something not about the historical incident. More, it represents something more about the mindset of most Calvinists, that they would defend this. And the more you read about the trial and what happened, I read it. A Servetus, his petition in jail, which he's calling out Calvin for Calvin's abuses and Calvin's control of the legal system. It's like you just get enraged of the misappropriation of justice. Yeah. There's no justice.
There's none.
Heresy is not executable crime. He wasn't even preaching there to be executed for like subversion or for blasphemy. There's no blasphemy because he's not preaching. He was just rounded up and killed because he had previously wrote a book, and then they saw their opportunity. It's just it when you read about the trial and read what happened in the trial, it'll make you.
I need to do an episode, like a long, in-depth episode, just exploring Calvin's Geneva and pulling in these sources. Like, there are sermons of his you can still find online from theonomists where he's advocating how rebellious children should be murdered. And it's like, people don't understand the darkness of that man's heart.
Mm-hmm. So find me the Calvinists, and there are Calvinists that exist who criticize John Calvin. One of the books that I quote for criticism of John Calvin is from a guy who basically idolizes him theologically, but criticizes his handling of the Servetus affair. But you very rarely you're going to encounter in real life a Calvinist who will condemn him for his actions. They'll always try to justify. It's like, like what are you doing here? What are you doing here?
Well, see,
I think
Calvin,
that part of the problem
Calvin had
here,
morally sufficient reasons for murder, just like their view of God can have morally sufficient reasons for decreeing, like Theodore Zachariades, his famous claim, like they believe it's not evil if God decrees it, and he can decree anything. So, why can't their people behave similarly? It's just mirroring what they're idolizing. And not everybody. I'm not making that disclaimer anymore. I'm done.
and this is where the whole Gnostic accusation really resides in, is he's kind of what he's talking about here is, see, he's not really saying this outrightly, but I think that to a lot of outsiders to Calvinism, that they reduce Calvinism all the way down to it's just a doctrine of determinism, and that's just all it is. And so,
well, I'm trying to change that. So Norman Geisler, in his criticism of open theism, is correct. Open theism is fundamentally a doctrine about the nature and character of God. And absolutely, that's what I want the conversation to turn to. It's not about if man has free will. It's about if God has free will.
Amen. Yes, Chris. Amen. I'm 100% on board with you there. Like, I was talking with a guy today, and he's like, "Can you summarize your view?" And I was like, "Let's start with God." Because it's a straw man to come in and go, "Well, we believe man has free will, so we can trump the will of God, and he can't know what we're doing down here." Yuck, yuck, yuck. Yeah. It's like, no. We're starting with the freedom of God. That's what we're starting with.
Right. And so if we could edge out of the movement all the open theists who are like, open theism is the doctrine that the future is open because God wanted a love relationship with man, so allowed libertarian. Like, stop it. It's about God. Yep. God has the freedom to add one raindrop to one storm, which he doesn't have in Calvinism. Matt Slick wouldn't answer the question when he was asked about it, because guess what? That adds potentiality into God. If that rainstorm was known to have a predetermined number of raindrops, you can't take a being of pure act and then add potentiality to change those things that are going to actualize. And so God does not have the capacity in Calvinism, consistent Calvinism. I don't think our friends here on the Boo Crew I don't think they know all the metaphysics of their system.
No, and so I think you and I both want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now it's funny because our friend over here in the side chat, Edward over here says, "Warren, you don't start with God, you start with man." I'm like, I just started with God. God is free, and he's like, "No, you don't." Like, I heard what you just said. None of that's you don't do that, Warren.
Is he making a joke though? Like,
I don't know, but this is let's give Ed the benefit of it. I'm going to call him Eddie. Let's give Eddie the benefit of the doubt.
If it's the benefit of the doubt, it's like a joke.
It's a joke.
He's
But my point is, and I'm not,
easy
I
goes.
hope you don't see any anger in me, but like, this is a common thing that I'll actually hear from real Calvinists, and they'll be like, "You're starting with man," and it's like, I literally just told you. Okay, good. Thank you, Ed.
I told you. We just can't read comments like super seriously.
No. And again, I'm fine. Right? There's no steam coming out from underneath my collar. But I get that. I do get that a lot. Like, Calvinists will come in, they're like, "You're starting with man." And it's like, no, we're starting with God. And so I'm 100% in agreement with you. That's where the conversation needs to begin. And I think you and I have even said in the past, we could affirm the freedom of God and say that God is free and was able to create the Calvinist world. Like, that is something God could do if he wanted to. But let's start with the freedom of God and follow those entailments out. And I don't think you end up with God creating the Calvinist world, because it's going to deny the freedom of God ultimately. And then you look at Scripture, and I think Scripture is going to deny the freedom of God. But historic Christianity has always begun with an affirmation of the freedom of God. So these are foundational truths. And I really want to see more of the open camp really go stronger on their doctrine of God and stop of this wishy-washy, God wanted a loving relationship. Oh, yeah, it's true, but that's not where we begin. Like, that's where we end up.
Yep. Fundamentally, who is God?
That's it.
Because, Gnosticism was there was a lot of variety in the Gnostic sects, but Gnosticism was really defined by
True.
a lot of different traits, and only some Gnostic sects even held to a doctrine of determinism. And I feel like it's really a big
So if anyone is
I'm sorry, by the way, Eddie, I hope you didn't think I was being too mean.
If anyone is defining Gnosticism by determinism, no, that would be completely incorrect. And so Benjamin seems to be under the opinion that he's getting called a Gnostic because of his belief in determinism. And so I don't know who's doing that, but whoever is equating Gnosticism and determinism is incorrect.
Red herring or something. It's like a non sequitur, or I'm trying to think of what kind of fallacy it is. But to connect, to reduce Calvinism down to determinism, and then find like a few Gnostic sects that believed in determinism, and then connect those two, and Calvinism is Gnostic. And I feel like I just feel that vibe coming off of what I'm reading there. Is it just sounds like he's just saying that he says to the.
I do have a book about Gnosticism and determinism, but the determinism it talks about in the book is about fatalism and the stars, which was a big thing. One of the things that Augustine rails against, he's like, "Oh no, we're not fated by the stars. Astrology is all incorrect." So that's not the type of fatalism that Augustine had either. And so sometimes when Augustine's criticizing fatalism, it's just a specific type of fatalism that he's critiquing.
Doctrine. But like, what is the doctrine? It's like, I think the doctrine to him is just determinism. And it's like, there's nothing more to Calvinism. It's not a vast, complex theological system with a lot of different aspects to it. It's just the doctrine of determinism. And I see that a lot with a lot of the Arminians too. Is they'll sit back and they'll just be like, there's this endless rant back and forth between a Calvinist and an Arminian about how, determinism versus free will. And I think they both think that that's the entire doctrine. And I think that's kind of lazy. There's way more to these theologies than just one area.
Yes.
Granted, it's a key area, but
I think one of the things that he's probably responding to is the pushback where they'll say, "Why are you?" And they'll say, "Because God determined." That's probably what he's picking up on, is the criticism of us going, "Look, you're being inconsistent when you're asking why. If you believe your own system, you already know the answer." Why are you trying to persuade us because you think we believe exactly what God decreed us to? So maybe he's responding to that too. And maybe these are getting crossed, like these wires are getting crossed where people are bringing up determinism as a rejoinder to a particular challenge. And he's kind of connecting that to Gnosticism. I don't know too many people that just come in and go, determinism is Gnostic, because you and I would say God is free to make determinations. We don't think we're Gnostic, like that's not where our mind goes.
Right. And so, I'm not sure who the people are he's interacting with. So seeing examples would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm done.
Now, Bradster, did you want to say something here, my friend?
Okay, so this is actually fantastic. He has now thrown on the screen my thumbnail of James White with the caption, "Could this man be the Boston Strangler?" with a question mark. And so the backstory with that is Warren had sent me a thumbnail of one of his videos, and it was a very normal James White debate or something like that. And I took
the one I think where he called me the theological buffoon.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, do you think people are going to understand I'm responding to this? Like, I think that's what it was. I sent that to you.
And then I think we got into discussion about like how you could say like anything you want if you add a question mark. And so I downloaded your screenshot or your thumbnail, and then I changed the text to, "Could this man be the Boston Strangler?" And then when you were promoting your little podcast, your episode, I started posting this thumbnail with your link to get people to think that you posted this thumbnail, that was your actual thumbnail for your video.
Thank you.
And so this was a troll against you. Okay, so really funny. So sometimes it's funny to do things like that where you're like making up ridiculous, like it's silly. It's like everyone knows he's not the Boston Strangler. And it's ridiculous even if it's in the form of a question. But like I was doing that to a Calvinist once, and he got really mad at me. He's like, "You don't do these. Yeah, you're just a bad faith. You don't do these things to your own side." I'm like, "I don't do these things to my own side." Like I literally posted videos in which I like accuse Leighton Flowers of killing Jimmy Hoffa, like multiple videos, just like making accusations that he's done these mob hits back in the whatever Jimmy Hoffa is. And the Calvinist like didn't know what to say. He's like, "Well, it's different. Like somehow it's different. Like I can't do these troll moves against my own side and his side, and somehow calling or implying Leighton Flowers as a murderer is like, I don't know."
Well, look at Roddy over there. Look at Roddy. He's cheering you on, man. He says it's funny when Warren's life has been made more difficult, and he finds out it was Chris that originated it. Like, that's half the time.
Man.
When White was responding recently on the dividing line, and he said there are certain open theists that engage in spitball. I know who he's lumping me in with. I'm listening to that, and I'm like, it's that rascal Chris Fisher.
Go watch Chris Fisher responds to the Calvinist movie trailer. Oh, it's just sometimes you got oh man, when I posted that fake John MacArthur story about civil rights or something, and then I like made up a whole bunch of stuff, and then I had like Calvinists in the comments just going crazy, like defending him, like a completely made up news story that was semi based on reality. Oh, they were like treating it like it was real. No, some this is we're on the internet, folks. We are literally on the internet. Not everything is meant to be taken seriously, and you're part of the act if you get taken in by some of these less than serious things. And so sometimes it's good to have fun.
At my expense. Thank you, Chris.
We live one life. It's rolling. They're just being silent.
Okay.
All right, I'm back, brother. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, I always want to speak. I got a big mouth. But anyway, here I am. So what I'd like to point out is whenever you go online and you're talking about all the different nuances in Calvinism, the one thing they will say is there's no such thing as a nuance. It's either your God is the author of sin, and I'm sure Benjamin would know what I'm saying here. This conversation is massive on the topic of Calvinism.
Yeah, well, yeah. Another video I put out was like, "Do animals go to heaven?" And which I claim that since animals don't understand, they have no capacity to conceptualize Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior, that all animals go to hell and burn for eternity. And so it's responding to a fake email from a kid asking if he's going to see his beloved dog Peanut Butter in heaven again, and it's like, I'm sorry, your dog will burn for hell in eternity. Oh, and people are like, what? How do you tell that kid that?
Oh man, we need to redo those with some AI and punch it up for the year 2024. Man, we need to take that to the next level. I like that one. I could have John MacArthur answering that letter. Let's combine some of these ideas, Chris. Let's combine some of these ideas. Let's take it to the next level.
So funny.
You're a bad influence, man.
I'm terrible.
And it goes with that whole mindset that he already plugged in when he was critiquing the words that he could see on the screen that I can as blind man. And what I say is, why can't you do something evil and God do what God does to overcome it? Like, I don't know, like Augustine would have said, you know. I don't remember reading that in any Gnostic playbooks or anything. So I'm just missing the links, guys. That's all I'm saying. Back to you, JC the Bear.
Amen, brother. Amen. Now, Brother Ken, I have a question for you, Brother Ken, because I got this meme from the open social media page.
It's a
Could
meme.
this man be the Boston Strangler?
It's a question. Like, okay, so the media will do this thing where like they won't go out and just say Trump is a racist. They'll be like, could Trump be a racist?
The question is not defamation.
Yeah,
it's an emphatic statement that can be defamation. So adding a question to it is not considered defamation. It's a legal loophole, and Chris is exploiting that to get James White further angry at yours truly.
Yeah, and so like it's nonsensical. Like the media will also do a thing where it's like, so and so says Trump is a racist. So they're accurately reporting their talking point without the legal liabilities of just lying by just quoting someone who is lying and things like that. And so it's weird, this reality that we live in which like that's perfectly acceptable to could this man be I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying, is it possible? Like maybe the answer is clearly no. Maybe, but it's just seeding the mind. It's this media strategy of manipulate, and like it's a nonsense thing too. So it's like there's not like a chance. Maybe I don't know where James White lived all his life, and I don't know when I think I like Googled like mass murderers. I was like, I think Boston Strangler is a thing, right? So I'll add that.
Dr. White, the Boston Strangler. That's
what were you going to say, my brother? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, just kind of get on what we were talking about, what Benjamin was saying, and Brad. It's why are the opponents to Calvinism pretending like the doctrines that we believe and espouse are not in Scripture? This is one of the things that puzzles.
We're just pretending.
I can answer it. They're not.
Okay. Yeah, so let's listen to his explanation, and then we can further comment.
Me for a long time when I was first interacting with people who were opposed to Reformed theology, and I was trying to say, election's in the Bible. Well, what they've done is they've kind of redefined all these terms. So, Reformed Christians, kind of more Orthodox Christians.
Okay, so speaking of Boston, I'll tell you a Boston story real quick.
About the city or the band?
About the city.
Okay.
And so I was out there for work-related events, and I was walking around with these ladies, right? And I'm showing them around Boston. We go to Boston Commons.
It's you and ladies, Chris.
Yep. Yeah. All my stories involve ladies. I'm showing them around Boston. I'm like, okay, over here, the Boston Commons. We're going to find the Liberty Trail over here. If we follow this, it's going to go down. There's going to be a graveyard on our left, and there's going to be a bookstore or whatnot. It's like, so I was showing them around Boston, telling them all these sites. They're like, what? Did you have you ever been here? I'm like, I've never been to Boston. They're like, how did you Google this? I'm like, no, I just play Fallout 4. Like, like I knew the general layout of Boston from playing this video game, and I was able to like show them around. So it was pretty fantastic.
I love it.
Christians have had these biblical terms that have stood the test of time over the years, hundreds of years now. And then now what they're doing is they're kind of taking those terms and redefining them. Like, for example, the doctrine of election in the Bible. So now there are different camps of what that means, the idea of God selecting a people to belong to Jesus Christ before the foundation of the world, as it says in Ephesians 1:4, other places, that God has chosen us in Christ. Well, they don't like that. And a lot of times it's like they'll take half our model, like the back half of it, and then say, well, yeah, you're elect. Like, for example, when we see in time and space, human beings coming to Jesus Christ, God, working on them, impacting them, working in them, and bringing them to, for God to will and work in them to bring them to Christ. So that would be the consequences of God's predestination through election before the foundation of the world. But they see that as if you're believing in Jesus Christ and you're repenting of your sins, then that means you're elect. Well, yeah, of course it does. That's the results of God's election, is that's what's happening. God predestinated the individual to come to Jesus Christ, to be justified, to be born again, spiritually baptized, and to belong to Jesus Christ, because God.
Jake says he zoomed into one side of his mouth that moves while he talks. He might have had a stroke. You might be making fun of a stroke victim. There is a possibility.
How do I get out of this stream? How do I get out of this stream, Chris? What have you done to me, dude?
Well, they don't see it that way. And a lot of my discussions that I had early on about this topic of a.
Oh man. So his criticism is, hey, Calvinism is in the Bible because you look through the Bible and you see the word elect a bunch of times, and you see the word predestined a bunch of times. And I'm going to let him finish out this thought.
Unconditional unilateral election by God, that He has chosen a people, and then we see these verses in these contexts in Scripture that discuss that God selecting, God choosing, making choices, that they just have a problem with that, and we try to explain that this is in the Bible. This is all through the Bible. God choosing people for different things. Especially our greatest need, salvation, right? So God
chooses people throughout the Bible, therefore Calvinism. And so his claim that Calvinism is throughout the Bible, it's concepts that the Calvinists talk about are found in limited circumstances throughout the Bible, therefore Calvinism is true. I think this seems to be his primary focus and his push with this, but it seems to me the fallacy of composition. If God decides one thing, that doesn't mean He decides all things. Our models have God deciding things, God electing people, which is just choosing people. If you read Jacques Moore's book, Deleting Elect from the Bible, he talks about how it's like selecting the best. Jesus has the parable of election in which he tries to get everyone, all the rich people. They all refuse him. He goes out to the poor people, and some of them accept, and some don't come in the right manner. They don't present themselves to the banquet in the right manner. And the elect are the ones who not only respond, but present themselves correctly. And those are who is the elect. And so when it says many are called, but few are chosen, that's the word elect. And that's Jesus's explanation of election, which is not Calvinist election. People are not refusing God. God does not fail. Jesus does not die for anyone who fails to be saved. Right? That's just basic Calvinism. It's not Jesus's idea of election is not Calvinistic election.
Well, and you talked about how a lot of these guys don't know their own metaphysics. And so he's using terms like predestined and foreknow. But again, if they're consistent with their metaphysics of God being atemporal, God doesn't, in their system, God literally doesn't foreknow anything because he's not temporally located to an event in the future.
Right.
God doesn't predestine anything. He's eternally and timelessly done it. There is no pre.
And God makes no decisions, because decisions means potentiality,
Yep.
also means discursive thought. There's no decisions in Calvinism.
And because God never made a decision, he never had to use wisdom. So there's all of this stuff that trickles down. God doesn't use wisdom. They would say he is wisdom, and this is the perfect, of all possible worlds. This is exactly what God eternally wanted, and this is just necessitated. But
so, go ahead.
I was going to say, I challenged Anthony Rogers on this, and he laughed and goes, "Oh, ha, 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 ha." But then after he goes through his little spiel, he goes, "Well, yeah, that's just anthropomorphic, analogical, metaphoric. Like, we don't really believe that." Right. So they're going to elevate, not these guys. I need to stop doing that. They're going to elevate this standard of saying, if you don't affirm foreknowledge, you're not a Christian. If you don't affirm predestination, you have a low view of God, whatever the argument is. But then when you press them on it, they don't affirm that either. We're the ones affirming a literal foreknowledge and a literal predestination.
Yeah, so I didn't get to it in the slick debate, but I was prepared to go over the passage which states that God's understanding is infinite. And so understanding is a different attribute of God than knowledge. Knowledge is just like knowing things. Understanding is actually processing those things, being innovative, thinking up new things. And that's what the passage is actually about, is God's innovative capacity. But Calvinism has no room for this innovative, intellectual, understanding capacity, discursive reasoning ability within God to process information. And so what do they do with the verse about God's understanding is infinite? They need to collapse it into a different attribute altogether. It actually has to be about his knowledge of propositions. God has all factual propositions eternally in his mind from all eternity in one simple act that's indiscernible from his own nature, things like that. But that's not the biblical concept. If you go take that word, go to your little Strong's dictionary, do a search on that word, it's about cleverness. It's about craftiness. It's about being able to process and think up good solutions. It's about discursive reasoning. That's what's infinite in God. And the Calvinists just can't have that attribute in their system.
Yep.
They just can't understand that's a part of the set of New Testament doctrines that the Apostle Paul was communicating, even the Apostle Peter, and they just...
So there might be a case to say that Paul follows Essene doctrines of special enlightening. One can make that case. I don't think it's the best reading of Paul's work, and I go over that in my new book, in which I go through Paul and talk about how he sees reality as fluid, the future as open. He tries to proselytize the lost. He talks about grafting new people in, reaching people who are unsaved. That's his idea of how this whole thing functions. So although I think there can be a case for Paul, I don't think it's a very good case that he followed the Essene ideas of election or choosing or spiritual enabling by God.
Reject every doctrine that Calvinism teaches, as a system. So it doesn't, for them, the anti-Calvinists doesn't matter if it's in the Bible or not, where it came from. It's just, well, if it's Calvinism, we have to oppose it. So they would rather, reject, like, for example, the topic of total deprivation, total depravity.
And so I think one good rule of thumb is, like, if something's found only within Paul's writing, like, you need to take it with a grain of salt. Maybe you're misreading Paul if it takes thousands of years of theological tradition to get to that point where this doctrine, like original sin, like what do they turn to? They turn to Paul, like a little passion. Like, what did people do before this point? What did people in Jesus's time who didn't have the New Testament, what did they believe about this doctrine? Where they was this like brand new? No one had been revealed this thing. What is going on in which this doctrine, you have to wait until Paul's on the scene in order to accumulate it? more than likely they're just misreading Paul. And so it's interesting that even the apostles, I think it's in Peter, he talks about Paul. He's like, he says a lot of things that are really hard to understand. So like, this is a follower of Jesus saying, hey, Paul says a lot of weird things. And so it's sometimes confusing. Maybe we shouldn't read our very detailed specific metaphysics into Paul without some sort of evidence, outside evidence confirming that.
Total inability, moral inability. They would rather reject that than instead looking for the scriptures and contexts in the Bible that discuss, our view of total depravity, total inability, moral inability. It's all through the Bible. It's in the New Testament. And we can find that systematically, but they reject it. And basically,
so Amber says, maybe if something doesn't show up in church tradition for a long time, it's something we shouldn't pay attention to. One thing we got to remember is that our evidence of the wider cultural milieu is very limited, and Christians were involved in book burning and rewriting history and leveling out what was very, very contentious early part of Christianity. Like a lot of these Gnostic documents we wouldn't have except for the Nag Hammadi library, which was discovered fairly recently. It's there. There's rewriting that happens within history to give a false perspective of a dominant narrative. But when you take a look at like what these people are talking about, you have Augustine and a riot happening in his church. His people were rioting for whatever reason. You have the layman monks rising up to try to kill, physically threaten people who are affirming the writings of Origen of Alexandria. These events, it's like mainstream Christianity is not a thing. There's not like the dominant trends that you see in the existing writings, not necessarily representative of the population at large. So we have to be very careful with what evidence we see of what has survived. The Arian Christians, we remember the Arians. They'll talk about this later, about how Augustine died as the Vandals are sacking his city. The Arian Christians are basically written out of history. They were persecuted. They fled. They did full circle through Europe and came back, and then got a little bit of retribution.
Well, one of the things he was saying here too is he's like, they won't address. He's saying critics of Calvinism won't address the biblical support for total depravity. I would like to invite Ken to my channel to check out all my live streams and series on total depravity, where I believe I've examined every single proof text for total depravity, if I'm not mistaken. And if there's one that I've missed, let me know and I'll add it. But that's an area that I focus on for years now, Ken. And I would tell you that every single proof text you think teaches it contextually either is talking about something else or refuting it. So we do consider the text of Scripture. It's why we don't affirm total depravity.
Yeah, so Amber says, I just spent some time reading the Church Fathers. I didn't see them if there's nonsense in there anywhere. So one book I think is very helpful, which I do have to convert into a hard copy for people, is the Christian Platonists of Alexandria, which talks about the Platonistic influences on not only Philo, but Clement, Origen, and I might even get into Augustine. But it's a very, very potent work for exposing Platonistic tendencies within the church within Alexandria. And so all those people were Platonists. All those people believed in concepts kind of like divine simplicity. They weren't like full blown as Augustine might be, but they were basically a little Philos of Alexandria. And Philo I do touch in my book. I do cover Philo of Alexandria and a lot of his conceptions of God as maybe a transcendent being. And in the Christian Platonists of Alexandria, he makes the interesting claim that Clement of Alexandria is the first Neoplatonist, which very likely is true.
Some of them,
and that's a loose term. Neoplatonism is just the school of Platonist theology that's existing around the 2nd, 3rd century. But Clement definitely is a forebearer of this.
Have their own view. But if when looked at closer, it's really not that different. It's just like it's almost like a lot of these things they make a really huge deal, and we're just splitting hairs on some of these things. I mean, even Arminians accept the doctrine of depravity. From Adam. I don't think classical Arminian, at least, I don't think they would reject that. But it just seems like this new batch of believers now with a really semi-Pelagian view called the Provisionists. They're very opposed to traditional Orthodox Calvinist Reformed theology teaching.
Well,
that's what I noticed. And with that, I'll pass it back to you.
What's funny too is like by that standard, we'd have to put the Anabaptists in the Provisionist camp and all of Eastern Orthodoxy in the Provisionist camp, because they don't affirm total depravity either. So, with respect to Ken here, the dichotomy is a false one. It's too myopic when it comes to Calvinist versus Arminian. Christianity is much broader and richer than that sort of debate. So, you can go and look at the Eastern Orthodox, you can look at the Anabaptists. It's not just semi-Pelagian Provisionists. This is I think this is revealing more about Ken's circle of reading and exposure than it is about his understanding of anything else.
Okay, so we got maybe some sort of disingenuous actor in the side chat saying his name's Destroyer of the Works of the Devil, says, Chris, tell us more about how God is, quote, pretty reliable, unquote. Well, in Calvinism, he's not reliable at all. So he'll take his greatest advocate, Matt Slick, and make his daughter into the worst human being imaginable. And so in Calvinism, yeah, not reliable.
You're killing me with this channel, man. With your strokes, you're bringing up Matt Slick's daughter. Bro,
you can't be associated with me.
Get me off this live stream.
Go ahead, Benjamin.
That is a pretty mean thing for God to. Why would God do that? That's like, why would God do that to you?
Just a quick 2 seconds. It was a slide. It was the slide with James White on it, where it says, "Is James White the Boston Strangler?" It was on that. It said that a lot of people become focused on the doctrine rather than on Christ. Now, I'll say this as an observer. I think that there are a lot of immature Calvinists, especially ones that, I see that are out there, that I feel like actually do fall into this camp. I think they do, because they focus so much on the tulip doctrine. Yeah, right there. They focus so much on the tulip doctrine that I never hear them talk about the actual death and resurrection of Christ. I never hear them they just want to only discuss predestination and only want to discuss just things to do with tulip. And I do understand that tulip does kind of address elements of the gospel, but I think that some of the people like yourself, for example, I can see, I'm sure most of you guys know what I'm talking about, is there's those guys that just kind of they want to get into the theology. They're newer, or they're immature, and they just only focus on that. And that's all they focus on. They never talk about Christ or the gospel, really. They just talk about the tulip. It's to them, it's an exercise. And I think
I feel like our Calvinist friend in this video, the Boo Crew guy, he might have messaged me and said, "Hey, do you have a gospel presentation?" I don't know if it was this guy here that's talking, but it's one of my first videos ever was just straight gospel presentation. So I sent it to that individual. So I don't know if that's related or not, if they were doing market research on me to see if I ever talk about Jesus for this criticism. Again, I didn't write this book, the Understanding Calvinism book, but I do wish I had. There are various things I would have changed, but overall, I think it's the.
How did you come by this book that's written anonymously? Was it submitted to you for publication?
Right, it was submitted to me, and he said, "Do whatever you want with it." And so I covered it in a podcast very early on, 2017 or something. And then I sat it on it for a while, and then I got access to AI voice recording, and I always wanted to get this book out there in another format. And so I spent the money and did the work, put the time in to convert it to an audiobook for everyone to enjoy. And then everyone's like, "Hey, can I get a hard copy of this?" Okay, I'll do that. And so that's how this came about. but it's presented for me to do with what I want to do. So it's a good book, and
Cool.
it's worth reading. And it talks about cult
Does it
mentality.
cover the Book of Wisdom?
It does not cover the Book of Wisdom, but it talks about cult mentality, which is something that I'm very interested in researching. The cults of narcissism and cult formation, and how people start thinking and operating in this kind of cult mindset control. And this book talks a lot about those things and indicators of cult status. And so that's very interesting to me on an anthropological level, because the study of how human beings think and operate is that's just one of my passions and interests. So this is the type of stuff I do like reading.
That's where that criticism comes from. But I don't think that's a fair criticism of Calvinism as a whole. I don't think that represents those people. I feel like a lot of times.
Amber says it's available in an ebook format. Yeah, so just go to Amazon, type in "God is Open," and then all my books are linked in a series. And so there's 5 out there currently, so you could click into it, and then you could see all the different books. So it's in a Kindle format.
When I see people on these forums talking, and people say, "Oh, look, that guy over there, he's a Calvinist," or it can be the other way too. He says, "Oh, he's an Arminian." That represents all Calvinists or all Arminians, and that's what they're all like. And I feel like that's unfair, because I've met mature believers that.
Okay, so you know what one of the most robust thing in social sciences is? Like social science, when they do studies, they're all over the map, and they have a real problem with recreatability. They can't recreate and get the same results over and over. But you know what the most robust facet of social sciences is? Stereotype accuracy. And so that is fun. The stereotypes exist for a reason. It's like so I don't know, white people like mayonnaise, and it seems to be generally true. Things like that, stereotype accuracy. And so the stereotypes, they don't exist for no reason. And so even though averages don't represent all the data points, Benjamin Hale, the guy who's talking, he might be an aberration, but there is an average. An average just doesn't exist. The average exists regardless of stray data points.
That focus on Christ and everything. That these like people that are new they're not indicative of the whole thing. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Go ahead, Rod.
Yeah. You see things like this picture up here, and it's hard to believe that someone would stoop to that degree of.
He's talking about the Boston Strangler picture. Okay, so I don't think he tells us, but what's wrong with the picture in question? Discerning. I don't know his last name. It's being cut off here.
Ignorance, I'm going to call it, I guess.
like nobody believes James White's the Boston Strangler.
I don't know, Chris. I don't know. I mean, I've started thinking about it, and a lot of dots are being connected here.
Oh man,
I'm gonna have to go and get my red twine and start creating a cork board.
Yeah. Oh, so really funny thing is, like, Bob Enyart was big in Denver, and he covered just the complete guilt of the John Benet Ramsey, the parents in that case, how they absolutely murdered their kid, and you had fanatics out there creating websites that Bob Enyart killed John Benet Ramsey. If anyone doesn't know that reference, that was the child star, like
She's like a beauty pageant or something.
Beauty pageant, yeah. And then her body was found dead in her parents' basement after the cops had gotten a ransom letter and stuff for her, and they were trying to stake out. And the parents would do weird stuff, like when they're waiting for the ransom call, they're just going about their normal chores like psychopaths. And then they put out a book called like The Death of Innocence, and they put their own pictures on the cover. It's like really weird stuff. It's like they definitely killed their kid. But you had like psychos out there saying Bob Enyart had killed John Benet. I got contacted by this person, like, Bob Hilliard's like, what are you? What? No. So, James White, Boston Strangler, maybe someone might believe that. I don't know.
You know, you look at something where you look at determination of things, God's sovereignty, and then you have the open theists that will see God's regret in some of the stuff. They're just picking on certain topics and not looking at the entire picture of God.
Well, like I wrote an entire book called Examining the Biblical Authors, in which I go systematically through the Bible, try to get the big picture. But I guess I'm not focusing on the overall picture.
If God wasn't also love and was totally sovereign, you'd have a dictator. But now we have a Lord that is watching out with us. He can see that someone is going to sin. He knows it's happening. It's going to happen. He didn't cause it to happen. That's why you see remorse from the love perspective. He said, "Oh,
is he describing dynamic omniscience right now, Chris?
I regret of creating mankind."
I don't think they know their own metaphysics.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of the reason they're very amenable and very kind is like they might not be fully aware of what they actually teach about God.
I think you're right.
And those things, those kind of comments are basically the love perspective of a sovereign king who is our Lord. And it just seems like everybody is so focused on their individual thought about something and not really listening to the other view, not really what really boils down. They're failing to listen to the Spirit, the actual word of God. The closer we are to the sound doctrine, the better we will all be. And it will probably be heaven before we realize that. But I think this world that we're going through right now will just make heaven that much more appreciated.
Amen, brother. Amen. Now, that portion of the criticism from the God is Open book is just meant to point out in an extreme example, in an obvious example, how sort of grudge focused and grudge based some of the criticisms can be. But to be honest with you, we've got some great critics. We've got some really great critics that I give thanks to God for.
Hold up.
Okay.
You invite me on your program. You skip over the part where they review me, right? It's your show. You can do that.
Let's go. Where are you?
Hold on. I'm a blip on the radar. I'm just being silly right now. So
no, it's like you are at the 125 mark. We're at the 124 mark. We're 1 minute away from you.
Okay.
We're literally 1 minute away from you.
I'm just saying, like we focus on you, and they call you grudge based, and then they go, "We got great critics over here." No. They go to the provisionist perspective.
They were. I think they were talking about Calvinists. Some Calvinists are grudge based.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't think that. I think that was an internal critique of their own side.
I'm just being silly right now. I'm having fun at the provisionist perspective.
But literally, if you hold on for 1 minute, they'll start talking about you. They'll start.
I'm picking on the provisionist guys. I thought they were saying they were great critics. I was like,
yeah, they get through with these guys in 1 minute is what we learned from our timestamps.
I'm a blip, dude. I'm a blip.
Let's go look how blippy you are, Warren. Oh, yep, you're 1 minute as well.
Yeah.
And then they go back to God is Open, but you're part of the broader community. If you write a book, we'll publish it under the God is Open label with the rest of our books.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about them. Of course, we've mentioned before our friends over at the Provisionist Perspective. Great channel. I love listening to what they have to say, even if I don't agree with it.
And they're very nice too. It's like not everyone's as mean as me.
No, Eric and Drew are awesome, man. Those guys are civil and kind and insightful, and I don't know why we're friends. We have nothing in common.
It's interesting. There are a lot of insights. There's a lot of scriptural focus that I can appreciate. And by the way, not everything in the provisionist perspective catalog is contra Calvinism. Probably maybe half and half. But still, we Calvinists, if we're going to interact with people, we have to listen. We have to enjoy listening to the perspectives of those who disagree with us. I say enjoy in air quotes. I mean, I think there are limits and there are reasonable limits, but it's if it's something that you sign up for as a keyboard warrior, I think that that goes part and parcel with the territory.
Keyboard warrior is an astute term. It's like a lot of times when people have that physical presence, they're not going to mouth off the way they do online.
Yeah.
I'll share a second channel that I respect. We talked about Warren McGrew over at Idol Killer. We interviewed him here on the Boo Crew. Like I said, he was our first interview, and it was something that we really looked forward to. Now, again, I think it's some of the same sort of situations here. Sometimes the criticisms are very interesting, deep, and insightful, and then other times there just seems to sort of be a grudge-based response to something that I think causes the brother to lose a perspective. Doesn't mean I'm throwing out his criticism. Doesn't mean I'm throwing him out of the kingdom. He has to say what he wants to say, and I think we owe him a listen.
No, hold
so I'm going to get back to our folks.
What was that? I feel like I just drove through like a small Texas town. Like it was just so quick. We didn't have a Dairy Queen at that stop. Like that was so small. Okay. No, I want to address a few things they said though. Was it's grudge based, right? I don't have a grudge against anyone, but I do have a problem with doctrines that I perceive to be opposed to the revelation of God and can put fellow image bearers in peril and place them in harm's way. So I think Calvinism is a poison pill. And so I'm very zealous in exposing that. And I do it through several different means. And so he's like, some of it's very thoughtful and some of it's very like surface level and grudge based. And it's like, dude, I'm eclectic. I'll have a 15-part historical review and criticism. I'll have an AI generated song about like a Billie Eilish wannabe. Like I'll have, hip hop tracks. I do parodies. I do satire. I try to mix it up because I get bored and I want to do something that's fun. And it's not just anti-Calvinism. Like I do a lot of things exploring the redemptive work of Christ, like from a historic Orthodox perspective. I'm working on an AI-based series right now where every one of the redemptive models that are non-Anselmian are going to be animated with AI, and you're going to have like a really brief overview of each of these in a little series itself. So if somebody wants to know, like, well, what are the other views? Well, here's a summary for each of those. The problem that I have is because I've been in the Calvinist space, I get sucked into that really quickly because, well, goodness, I'll get asked to debate James White, and then that blows up. So I want to respond to that, or I'll go on Leighton Flowers' channel and I'll make a passing remark buried in a 3-hour comment, and next thing you know, it's like a 6-month-long controversy.
You do know how to touch the right buttons. I think your latest video has like 140 comments on it. And so I was having fun reading through all of those and responding to select ones. And so people love the things that you're touching on. And so maybe
it's working. It's working. And I've had pastors reach out to me and say, Warren, I was a Calvinist pastor and I saw your debate with Matt Slick, and then I started watching your series on total depravity. I came out of Calvinism. I thought I was going to lose my church, but they stood behind me. Like I got that message, I think this last week or two. like I get some really cool, like you've helped restore my relationship with my dad and my son, and like I was on the verge of losing my faith, and like I get some really cool, encouraging stories. But if you're a Calvinist, you just see the teeth, you're like, Warren, he's always coming at us. But there's good stuff coming out of Idol Killer, like for the kingdom, like with eternal reward there. So that's really awesome to see. And Calvinists don't get to see that. Very few people get to see it because they're not getting all the emails and stuff that I get.
Well, I think generally from your videos of yourself, you seem to be like in a happy, good mood. I wouldn't say that with the James White videos. He's not a happy person.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that he loves life. And like I get criticized that I'm like the big criticism from the Matt Slick debate is like I'm I'm smiling all the time. I'm just too happy and lovely. It's like, it's
They
okay
hate
to
your
be happy.
smile. That was one thing I kept seeing. They're like, I hate that that smile. And it's like, you rather him be scowling? Like, like what? Oh.
They're like, okay, so there's actually, I was very young, and my dad had bought like a debate from the Bob Enyart website. Bob Enyart Debates a Calvinist Pastor. It's free on YouTube, where there's this guy with the big black beard, black hair. And my dad pointed out in the video, every time we paused it to talk about it, he looked like he was like angry. It's like every single time. It's like, what is? And so that's when I probably started first noticing like people's demeanors, in addition to like the things that they're saying. It's like he's always an angry guy. I don't know. Every time you pause, like it's a Matt Slick video when he's debating me. Every single pause is just like, ooh, ooh, like all these weird, like what is happening?
I like to laugh. I like to have fun with what I'm doing. I like, like I've got a relationship with the living God. I mean, that you should have joy flowing out of you. I mean, I like to smile. Does that offend people? I hope not. I don't care really.
Good time.
So we were just talking about a moment ago, the God is open circle. Now, listen, this is tough because this is coming from a position that within Calvinism is recognized as being outside of orthodoxy because of its strong differences in the doctrine of God. And I'm not here to throw names around or to lob the H-bomb, but I think we Calvinists, when we want to engage with critics, we've got to engage with critics. And the folks over here have something to say that's worth listening to and following up with. And if you don't want to listen to those folks, then I ask my friends, why do you want to be a critic? Because this really does seem part and parcel. Benjamin, go ahead, brother.
So he's not wrong there. Most of the YouTube that I do consume is hostile, I'd say. And it's more interesting to read a hostile work than a friendly work. It's very tedious to go through McCabe and edit like things that I think are obvious and already agree with. It's more interesting to find things that you think are wrong and pick apart why they're wrong. It's like then you get this outside perspective. You have to do mental work to it's more interesting to listen to a sermon you disagree with sometimes and say, hey.
It's funny because when I was a Calvinist, I always stayed with people that I agreed with. But now I find myself listening almost 90% to people that I disagree with. It's weird how that shift has occurred.
Yeah, we go to a Calvinist church. The pastor will say something, and I'll turn to my kids. He said that because he believes in total depravity or something like that. He believes that they have the enlightening that allows them saved. And so you pick up on things and just nuances in their speech and why their phrasing is in certain ways because of like their pride. That's interesting.
I just wanted to say just a quick comment on open theism. Something that I share with you guys is the belief in monergism. That's I think to me the biggest thing. And I think open theism is like they think that this is making like sort of a a comforting thing. I think open theism is terrifying. I think it's
This is
terrifying.
important.
The idea.
I'm sorry.
I said this statement he's making right now is very important to pick
Right.
up on the motivations.
That like somehow God doesn't already know what's going to happen and hasn't already planned it out, and that your future is just like kind of up to you. I think that's just extremely terrifying. I think it was Calvin himself that said that the doctrine of predestination is for the comfort of the believer. In other words, like, you can take comfort in knowing that like God's already prepared everything and he's got it all figured out in advance. But that open theism doctrine, man, that's like some scary stuff. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so we should talk about this a little bit. He starts his comment with saying, "Open theists have an emotional attachment to being correct," and then goes on to describe his own emotional attachments to open theism being false, which is an interesting trajectory for his claims about. It would have been interesting if he would just critique it and say, well, that's the moralistic fallacy, and that our feelings don't determine truth, something like that. But he goes on to try to create a counter emotional appeal.
And he, one of the things he said was it was terrifying if God hasn't determined everything. It's like, well, wait a minute, you want a God who's determined every instance of sin and evil, and you're going to find comfort in that. I find that terrifying, because here you're praying to an arsonist and you're abused by a savior. That's what happens. Your savior is your abuser, is your savior is your abuser, if God has determined everything.
You just cross your fingers. I hope I'm one of the elected, don't burn for eternity through no fault of my own. All my arbitrary experiences I think are real, which are really just puppeteering, is like, I hope it turns out good. Hopefully, just kind of have to hope for things. I always think of the little clip from Men in Tights, Robin Hood Men in Tights. It's like, Blinken, what's it doing up there? And he's the blind guy in the lookout, and he's like, I'm guessing. I guess someone's coming. It's like, I hope I'm saved. I don't know. It's just hoping.
Great point, brother. Great point. Now, the granddaddy of them all, a channel we respect and wish to commend for those who want to engage with Calvinist critics. You've got to think about Soteriology 101.
And we're going to head and skip
Leighton. Skip Leighton.
One of the rougher
guy.
Yep, boring. I want to hit Augustine or Augustine. Okay, so here it is. This guy is so nice that he put timestamps on all these topics. Thank you. So we're skipping Leighton Flowers, but he talks about him. But he goes to this guy, Will Durant. And I was like, I know that name. Was he one of those Soviet apologists? And that's a different guy. And he's talking about Will Durant, who actually went to the Soviet Russia and then reported back that it was a prison and a hellhole or whatnot. And so this was a good journalist and not who is the really bad guy. It started with a W, last name started with a D.
Not sure.
I'll grab it real quick. But yeah, so historian and talks about ancient philosophy. Let's see what he says. It's Walter Durante. Walter Durante was.
It's not Jimmy Durante.
No, I hope not.
Mrs. Alabasta.
But just
showing my age.
One of these lying scum journalists who reported back that the Soviet Union was a great place and just put all their propaganda during the slaughter of millions of people. But Will Durant is actually a good guy. And so we're quoting a good guy.
Positions that's critical of Calvinism. And I think I wanted to share a slightly different perspective from somebody who's definitely outside of Calvinism, but who wants to make some criticisms that we have to read, we have to consider. This is author Will Durant He was a historian in the early to mid 20th century, published a very famous series of volumes, historical volumes, The Story of Civilization. And it's well worth your time. He has some things to say about Calvinism. We don't always agree with him, but we count him as among reputable critics. Now, one of the interesting things mentioned here, Benjamin, you talked about this earlier, and it had to come up. Will Durant says here, he makes this link. Stoicism, he says, was a noble philosophy. It brought together all the elements of Greek thought in a final effort of the pagan mind. Then he says this, like its Christian counterparts, Calvinists.
So one thing that I will criticize J.C. Bear is like contextually, Will Durant might not be saying the things that J.C. Bear is getting out of this. He says Stoicism, Will Durant says that Stoicism gives puts together all the elements of Greek thought in a system of morals. And so is Durant equating morality, a system of morals, the same as philosophy, a system of metaphysics? He might be saying something different than what J.C. Bear is getting from this.
And Puritanism, it produced the strongest characters of its time. Listen to this. Theoretically, it was a monstrous doctrine of an isolated and pitiless perfection. And yet, actually, it created men of courage, saintliness, and goodwill. What an interesting anti-Calvinist, non-Calvinist perspective. Now, Will Durant says this about Augustine. Late in Augustine's life, Augustine was part of the Vandal siege. The Vandals went through North Africa at the end of Augustine's life. They besieged his city of Hippo, where he lived. And Will Durant has this to say.
Very early, you pointed out my sidebars, and that there's videos on Sola. Sola did kind of the thing that the Vandals did. The Vandals came around, they were Arians, they were being persecuted, and they got power, they sieged, and they started retribution. And I'm a big believer in retribution. So I think Sola was a good guy, and the Vandals might have been doing just retribution against their persecutions as well. It's like you had these theological persecutions going on in the 2nd and 3rd century AD. It's like, well, you give and you get. But Augustine did not die to the Vandals, unfortunately.
The Vandals laid siege to Hippo. Augustine maintained the morale of the starving people by his sermons and his prayers. In the 3rd month of the siege, he died, aged 76. Few men in history have had such influence.
True.
Wow.
True.
Durant is no Calvinist, and he's in fact quite critical. And yet he does the thing that very few Calvinist critics do. He says of Augustine, few men in history have had such influence. Now, an interesting follow-up to that, he says this about Augustine. He says, Eastern Christianity never took to Augustine, partly because he was thoroughly un-Greek in his limited learning and in his subordination of thought to feeling and will. Now, I want to ask my critics who want to make Augustine the smuggler in of Greek doctrine, of Greek paganism into the church. How can he be smuggling in Greek doctrine into the church and yet at the exact same time the Greeks himself refused to receive him because he is so thoroughly un-Greek.
Okay, so
It's conflating two different points about the Greek here. One is
Yeah.
metaphysics, and one is an understanding of the Greek scriptures.
right. Well, I think basically Eastern Orthodox, they're like literally culturally and physically Greek.
Yeah.
Like Augustine was North African. He didn't speak Greek. He didn't read Greek very well. When he's reading the Platonists, he found books of the Platonists in Latin. He's a Latin speaker, and so I think that's what Will Durant is actually talking about. Like ethnically, he doesn't come from the Greek culture. Not that his philosophy doesn't have ultimate origins from Platonism. And again, the hotbed of Platonism, Gnosticism, all these views was Alexandria, which is actually in Egypt. It's not in the Greek world. It's not in Greek Christianity. It's not in Judaic Christianity. It's in Alexandria, is where the hotbed of Hellenization is happening. All the Gnostics are coming from Alexandria, and so I think that's this is a cultural distinction and not a philosophical distinction.
These stories are not lining up. There's another follow-up here from Durant in the same line. Until the 13th century, Augustine dominated Catholic philosophy, giving it a Neoplatonic tinge. What is Neoplatonism? It's a Greek philosophy.
And so here's what I was talking about earlier, where Will Durant, not Durante, not the Soviet apologist, but Will Durant is not citing sources. He's just summarizing like his studies. And so I think it's being misread, his generalizations, because people don't know what aspect he's specifically referring to during writings of these general statements. That's why it's very important to go back to your primary sources. You have Augustine, and he says, I got these books of the Platonists. I thought all true philosophy could be had from the Platonists, but Christianity gave me charity. It gave me Jesus. And what was Jesus? The divine enabling spark to ascend. And he said that the Bible was absurd until read spiritually, and until he read it in light of Platonism. He had to have his Platonist glasses on. And Augustine tells us exactly, it's not controversial at that time to be a Platonist Christian, to endorse Platonism, to treat Platonists like equals, and to revel in the fact that you're teaching Platonism. One second. And so Augustine's friends will brag and they'll say, hey, your writings are full of Plato, Plotinus, and Christ. And this is a brag. This is, you're boasting. It's like, wow, you are so educated and so smart. You're combining all these things, and I'm just reading Plato when I'm reading you. Like Philo of Alexandria, the statement was about him was either Philo Platonizes or Plato Hellenizes. So close to their doctrines, they loved Platonism. And so you can read it. This is what my books are about. This is what my books are about, the Hellenization of Christianity, and how these thoughts came into the church, to what extent they infected the church, their origins, and their spread. That's what I'm trying to get through with this series. But Augustine said that the Bible is absurd until he read it in light of Platonism. And what did he get from the Platonists? That he found absurd is a non-transcendent God. And I do talk about or link to a lecture about Augustine, in which an Augustine scholar talks about how interesting it is that Augustine did not encounter an idea of a transcendent God until he was in his 30s. He didn't get it in Manichaeanism. He didn't get it in his previous Christian life before this. He did not encounter it until Platonism. And that's when his world exploded. His eyes, they lit up, and he got his true philosophy. And then on top of that, he added Christianity. And Augustine writes that, thank God that he found Christianity after Platonism, or else Platonism would have pulled him away from Christianity, because Platonism has all the philosophy that he needs. It's like, this is what we're talking about. This is the Hellenization. This is the Platonization. Just take Plato's name grab a big work by Augustine and just run it through iterations. Search for Plato, search for Platonism, Platonists, things like that, any derivative type of word, and then see what you come up with and see how he treats them, how he talks about them, what his arguments or actual contentions with actual Platonists are. It's an intra-Platonistic debate, not an extra. It's not insider outsider, in the same way that he would be with other Christians, like the Manichees or Pelagians or whatever. You got some thoughts, Warren?
No, I'm thinking that we're coming up at the 2.5 hour mark, and I'm realizing that I'm getting a little spacey. And,
right. Yeah, we'll cut there, but I did want to hit the Augustine part.
It's
before we go.
11:30, and I'm an old man, bro.
Well, get the audiobook of Hellenization of Christianity, and it will put you straight to sleep.
Anytime I'm tired, I put on some of your videos, and they do the trick.
They will pass you out in a second. Like I used to run the intro with like, if this was turned into a movie, everyone would be bored to death or whatever, like a fake New York Times quote or something like that. And so it's absolutely true.
It's better than tryptophan or melatonin. I mean, I'm just right. I'm ready, man. I'm ready.
We will cut there, but I think
I had a good time. Thank you, Chris. One of the things too I want to say that's nice about the Boo Crew is they put together this list of critics, and they're like, we need to consider what they're saying. You know, we need to have thoughtful answers, and I major props to these guys for being willing to do that. That shows a lot of integrity on their part.
Yeah, they don't seem like bad people. I was expecting something like real bad, and then it's like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, was not expecting that. It's not. This is atypical. This is an atypical experience when Calvinists are critiquing you. And
I had a great time when they brought me on their program. They were very civil, very respectful. They'd say, "This is how I understand your view. Is that correct?" They'd give me an opportunity to correct them. I mean, I'd recommend anybody that likes these sort of discussions, reach out to them and have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you so much for your time too. I know your time is not worthless. Your time's very valuable, and you got a million ladies that you're wooing online.
That's true. I've got 4 daughters, 1 son, and a million ladies on the internet.
Yeah, who just want to be mother to your children.
That's it.
Positions opening, taking applications.
I am taking applications. I am taking applications.
Start with a headshot, like
no. I start with the fine print. You got to be cool with dad bods. You got to be cool with a lot of kids. You got to be cool with like financial ruin, and then we'll work on chemistry.
Someone says, have you read Nick Sayers' book on Revelation 16:5? I feel like I have. I feel like I've seen it in some fashion, and someone had brought it up to me before, and then I read some of it. But don't quote me on that. Don't think that I have read it. I just have a feeling internally. Anyways, I thank you so much for your time. Any closing remarks other than what we just stated? You plug your channel, Idol Killer, website under construction.
That's right. Yep. Go to Idol Killer on YouTube and subscribe if you're into weird content. And I had a good time, Chris. I always enjoy hanging out with you. There were a few moments that I got a little scared tonight, to be honest, with where
that's okay. But as we know secretly, you love it, but you just have to act that way for the camera so that you're not associated with those jokes.
That's exactly right. On the inside, I'm going, oh, that's hilarious.
You got to do the performative acts,
I mean, it is funny how when I come on, I do tend to get into trouble. So I got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. We're at exactly 2:30. So we'll end there. I do got an outro. Let's go find it. And I made it so it didn't cut back to us awkwardly as well. And so that last time we're just like kind of waving, hi guys.